On March 11, 2011, at 2:46 in the afternoon in Japan, a magnitude 9.1 earthquake suddenly split the floor of the Pacific Ocean. The crack along the coast of Japan reached almost 400 kilometers in length. No broadcast tonight, the big one hits Japan. A massive history-making earthquake, one of the largest ever measured. And it triggers a massive tsunami all the way to the US, a 40.5-meter wave, 6 minutes. Almost 18,000 people lost their lives by nightfall. No less than 1,000 people were reported dead or missing in the first hours after the disaster, and the number of victims continued to rise as time passed. Japan's warning system had never experienced such a massive wave before. The Pacific Ocean had never pushed this much water in a single wave, and not a single nuclear power plant in the world was designed to withstand the disaster that was coming. This is the story of the giant wave that almost wiped out all of Japan. But before we begin, if you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. On the shores facing the Pacific Ocean, in small villages rarely visited by tourists, there are ancient stone markers carved into the cliffs. Some of these are over 600 years old. They all bear the same message: do not build houses below this area. Japan has lived with earthquakes in the same way other countries live with rain. This is because the country is located at the intersection of 4 tectonic plates. That's why it's one of the most active places in the world when it comes to earthquakes. The earliest written record about a tsunami on the coast of Tohoku dates back to the year 869. For more than 1,000 years, Japan has been preparing for this very day. By 2011, Japan also had the most advanced earthquake warning system in the world. The sensors placed under the sea send real-time data to central monitoring stations. The sirens reach almost every town in the bay. Within just a few seconds, millions of people receive tsunami warnings on their cell phones. The seawalls along most of the coastline were built to withstand waves up to 6 meters high. Even the nuclear power plants were designed for the most extreme disasters engineers could imagine. But the worst-case scenario they expected was wrong. According to the hazard maps used by towns like Okawa, north of Sendai, the tsunami was not expected to reach more than a few hundred meters inland. The seawall at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was built to block waves that were only about 6 meters high. However, the highest tsunami recorded up to that point in that part of the coast, the Sanriku tsunami in 1896, reached 38.2 meters. In 2011, the height of the wave that hit Miyako reached 40.5 meters. The warnings were already there, and they had been there for a long time. By 2:46 in the afternoon, the ocean floor suddenly split open. In Tokyo, which is more than 300 kilometers away from the center of the earthquake, buildings swayed for a full 6 minutes. The tall buildings in the Shinjuku district bent and swayed like trees being battered by a powerful storm. But in Sendai, which is closer to the epicenter, the ground didn't just shake. It seemed to suddenly ripple and slip away from under people's feet. People on the streets could barely stand. Tables, cabinets, and other furniture slid across the floor on their own. Items came crashing down from the shelves. After just 3 minutes, the Japan Meteorological Agency issued the highest tsunami warning. Sirens blared all along the Tohoku coastline. In the coastal towns, loudspeakers repeatedly announced a very important order: immediately move to higher ground. However, at that moment, many people were still preoccupied with the earthquake itself. Some were still taking shelter under their desks. Others hurried outside their homes to make sure their loved ones were safe. In Japan, tsunami warnings are common. Usually, no big waves follow. But this time was different. While the ground was still shaking, the ocean floor along a 400-kilometer fault line suddenly rose by up to 10 meters. Because of this, billions of tons of water were pushed upward, and had nowhere else to go but to spread rapidly in all directions. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the tsunami moved at a speed of about 700 kilometers per hour, almost as fast as a jet airliner. From the surface of the sea, it was almost unnoticeable. It just looked like a long and gentle wave. But as it approached the shallow part of the shore, the massive volume of water began to compress and rise. A wave that was only about a meter high in the middle of the ocean became a gigantic wall of water, with a height of 10, 20, up to 30 meters when it reached the shore. 20 minutes after the earthquake, the first waves hit the northern coast of Tohoku. In Sendai, the interval before the tsunami arrived was even shorter. For people living on the coast, there is a definite sequence of signs. First, the sea suddenly recedes. Hundreds of meters of beach suddenly appear. The boats docked at the port were left on dry sand. The older fishermen immediately recognized this. This was the warning their ancestors had taught them. The sea breathes in before it breathes out. After this, a strange sound came. A deep rumble that seemed like an approaching train. But as each second passed, it grew louder. It came closer, until it became even more terrifying than any train you could ever hear. Eventually, many survivors described it the same way. It was like their whole life was slowly falling apart. And then, a dark line appeared on the distant horizon. As it got closer, it no longer looked like a line. It had become a massive wall of water. In Miyako, the wave reached a height of 40 meters. In Kamaishi, footage from a helicopter showed how the tsunami swept over the massive seawall. It was as if it was made of paper. The vehicles on the coastal road were first pushed sideways. Then they were lifted by the rushing water, before being completely swept away. In Kisanuma, almost the entire commercial fishing fleet of the city was lifted out of the harbor, swept inland and dropped between houses. A ship, the Asia Symphony, was found stranded on a residential street the next day, more than 3 blocks away from the sea. Meanwhile, in Otsuchi, the raging flood completely engulfed the municipal building. This caused the officials on the upper floors to become trapped as the water continued to rise. At that very moment, all of this was happening along more than 500 kilometers of coastline, while the sun was still shining brightly. The Sendai Plain is one of the widest and flattest coastal plains in Tohoku. There are kilometers of rice fields between the sea and the foothills of the mountains. There was no natural barrier to stop the rushing waves. When the tsunami came, it surged straight into Sendai Airport from the seaside. Within just 60 minutes after the earthquake, the entire first floor of the main terminal was submerged in more than 3 meters of dark water. The vehicles parked in the long-term parking area were swept away and crashed into the steel fences. Approximately 1,300 people, including passengers, airport employees, and residents who evacuated from the nearby community, climbed to the roof and the upper floors of the building. From there, they could do nothing but watch as the massive waves slowly engulfed the runways. Some of them still had working cell phones. They started recording videos. Those clips taken from the airport roof were eventually seen by the whole world. You can see the dark, raging water carrying cars, trees, wreckage from houses, and oil from storage tanks that were torn open by the tsunami. In some places, even the water was on fire. Right in front of the camera, entire communities slowly disappeared. The tsunami reached almost 10 kilometers inland from the coast of Sendai. In some areas, it even reached up to 15 kilometers. The rice fields turned into vast lakes. Cemeteries were dug up and destroyed. The wooden houses were uprooted from their foundations and shattered into pieces within just a few minutes. By the end of the day, more than 122,000 buildings had been completely destroyed. Almost 1 million others suffered varying degrees of damage. But the part that left the deepest impression on the world happened several hundred kilometers further south. At the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, 6 nuclear reactors stood on a low cliff facing the Pacific Ocean. The seawall protecting it was 5.7 meters high. Exactly 3:27 in the afternoon, or 41 minutes after the earthquake, The first wave of the tsunami hit the seawall, and most of the water was blocked. But by 3:35 in the afternoon, the second wave arrived. This wave was approximately 15 meters high. It easily passed over the seawall as if there was no barrier at all. It immediately flooded the lower floors of the reactor buildings and submerged the emergency diesel generators that powered the plant's cooling pumps. Within just 1 minute, the 3 reactors, which were still operating at that time, completely lost backup power. Although their normal operations had already stopped, the reactors continued to generate intense heat. But since the cooling system was no longer working, nothing was stopping the rapid rise in temperature. Underneath 3 sturdy buildings made of reinforced concrete, the 3 nuclear cores began to melt. This was the first tsunami in history that caused a massive nuclear disaster. While all of this was happening, thousands of ordinary people were forced to make almost impossible decisions. In the city of Ishinomaki, a man named Hideaki Akaiwa was at work when the earthquake struck. His town was one of the hardest hit by the tsunami. He immediately went home, but when he arrived, he found their community submerged in more than 3 meters of cold, dark water. His wife of 20 years, Hiromi Akaiwa, was believed to still be inside their flooded house. He could no longer wait for the rescuers, because at that moment, there was no rescue team capable of helping right away. They were all busy rescuing thousands of other disaster victims. He borrowed a wetsuit from a friend. He put it on, carefully waded into the cold water, and started to swim. He swam for more than 200 meters, surrounded by drifting debris, logs, shattered glass, wrecked vehicles, pieces of houses, and other things he tried hard not to look at. Finally, he reached their own house. Only the second floor was sticking out above the water. His wife, Hiyoko, was there. He was able to save her successfully, but his mission did not end there. The next day, he went back into the raging flood to look for his mother, but he could not find her. For 4 days, he kept coming back, searching among the destroyed houses and dangerous waters. On March 15, on the 5th day of searching, he found his mother on the second floor of another house that was submerged in the flood. She was alone, terrified but still alive. Once again, he was able to save her, and instead of stopping, he spent the following week diving into other flooded houses all over Ishinomaki to search for the missing loved ones of other families. But just a few kilometers from there, things did not end so well. At Okawa Elementary School, teachers and students gathered in the schoolyard after the earthquake stopped, exactly as stated in their disaster response plan. Some parents arrived one by one to pick up their children, but the teachers advised them to stay at the school for now. According to the official hazard map released by the prefecture in 2004, Okawa was supposedly safe from tsunamis. In the memories of the residents, a tsunami had never reached that area. 40 minutes passed. As time went by, the Japan Meteorological Agency raised the warning on the radio. The expected wave height rose from 6 meters to 10 meters. But the teachers still couldn't agree on what the right thing to do was. The situation got even worse because the school's disaster manual didn't specify where the nearest high ground for evacuation was. In the end, they decided to follow a road beside the river leading to an area about 6 to 7 meters high, but it was already too late. 51 minutes after the earthquake, the massive tsunami reached the school. Most of the people who took that route did not survive. After a few years, a court in Japan decided that the school was negligent in their evacuation. The authorities were ordered to pay damages to the families of those who perished. To this day in Japan, the name Okawa remains a symbol of one of the biggest mistakes on March 11, 2013. Not because the tsunami was stronger there than in other places, but because the people in charge had enough time to make the right decision, yet they failed to do so. Meanwhile, inside the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, as the nuclear reactors were slowly melting down, 50 workers refused to evacuate. Eventually, they would be known as the Fukushima 50. Most of them were veteran operators and engineers led by the plant manager Masao. For many hours, they worked in almost complete darkness, breathing air filled with radiation, and with almost none of the instruments working. They laid out hoses from the fire trucks to pump seawater into the reactors and reduce the intense heat. They also set up temporary power lines that they plugged in amidst the rubble. They hoped to restore the power supply to the plant. For several days, their families had no news about whether they were safe or still alive. When news spread that more volunteers were needed, around 250 retired Japanese engineers, most of them over 60 years old, willingly volunteered to take on the most dangerous tasks. Their explanation was simple but very painful. Cancer caused by radiation usually appears after many decades. We don't have that many decades left to lose. The Japanese government accepted their offer. By the morning of March 12, the true extent of the damage was gradually revealed. Entire towns along the 500-kilometer coastline seemed to have completely disappeared. Not just damaged, but almost erased from the map. The former communities had become vast piles of broken logs, destroyed vehicles, scattered concrete, and the bodies of victims. Before the week ended, the 3 reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant experienced partial or complete nuclear meltdowns. There were also powerful hydrogen explosions that blew off the roofs of 2 of the reactor buildings. Due to the danger of radiation, the government established a 3-kilometer evacuation zone around the plant. Approximately 150,000 residents were forced to evacuate. Most of them left without knowing when they would be able to return, and for many, they were never able to return to their homes. The number of casualties continued to rise as the days went by. Many of the victims were buried under thick rubble or swept away by the raging sea, making them difficult to find. By 2026, the official number was 15,901 confirmed dead, while 2,519 people remain missing and are presumed dead. In total, more than 18,000 people fell victim to one of the biggest tragedies in Japan's history. The direct economic damage is estimated to have reached $210 billion. Up to now, it is still considered the most expensive natural disaster in recorded human history. By June 2012, nearly 347,000 people were still living in evacuation centers and temporary shelters. Many towns were later relocated away from the coast and built on higher ground to be safer from future tsunamis. Meanwhile, the former seaside communities were turned into memorial parks, wide open fields and new seawalls in remembrance of the victims of the tragedy. Japan rose again, as it always does in the face of every challenge. They built new seawalls, and some of these have reached heights of 12 to 15 meters. They also created new evacuation routes that lead to higher ground than before. And along the coastline, they once again placed stone markers as warnings for future generations. But the most important change cannot be seen in the seawalls or on the maps. For more than a century, the design of almost every seawall in Japan was based on a single belief: that the largest tsunami that happened in the past would also be the largest tsunami that could happen in the future. But after March 11, 2011, that belief was completely shattered. Currently, every city along the coast of Japan, as well as many countries around the Pacific Rim, are now preparing for a tsunami that could be even bigger than any previously recorded. The records from 869-1611, 1896, and 1933 remain an important part of their history. But now, alongside these, there is a date that will never be forgotten. March 11, 2011. The day when a massive wall of water, even higher than a 12-story building, surged in from the sea. It continued to advance more than 10 kilometers inland. It claimed more than 18,000 lives, caused the meltdown of 3 nuclear reactors, and nearly brought the entire country of Japan to its knees. Before we end, let us remember that every number mentioned in this documentary is not just a statistic. Each one had their own name, their own family, and their own dreams that suddenly disappeared in just a matter of minutes. The tragedy on March 11, 2011, serves as a reminder to the whole world that no matter how advanced technology becomes, there are still forces of nature that humans cannot control. but it also showed the resilience, courage, and unity of people who were willing to risk their own lives to save others. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to watch more stories about history, world-changing disasters, science, and other amazing events, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Noel Polo TV, and click the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming documentaries. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, this is Noel Polo TV, where together we explore and discover the stories that shaped our world.